Well, once again, Neil Melancon joins us for this week's Bottom Line. And Neil, when you were speaking to Dr. Cole a little bit earlier in the show, you used a term that I don't think many of us are familiar with, namely margin compression. What exactly is that?
Well, Avery, it's a term that explains a lot about what's going on in the ag industry right now. And while there's a lot of money floating around, there's not necessarily a lot of profit. We've talked about this before with the livestock sector in particular, where even though livestock prices have soared, profits haven't necessarily done so. Sure, ranchers are selling their cattle at higher prices than ever, but unless they're getting out of the business entirely, replacement cattle costs are soaring. So even though they're making historically high prices for those cattle, they're sometimes seeing higher prices for the replacement calves than they sold their fed cattle for. And that's only if they can find calves, which in some parts are scarce or non-existent. Supposing they have cattle to breed, there's also the cost of feeding and watering those cattle. This year we've seen many parts of the southern plains, which includes Texas, have a 90% or greater poor to very poor rating in their pasture lands. And while that's been good for Louisiana folks to sell them hay, it adds to the overall overhead they face and long-term beef prices as well. This margin compression affects almost all commodities, and it's most easily explained like this. When you have low prices, generally the overhead costs are also low, so even though you're not making as much money per unit, you're also not paying out as much, and you can increase profit by increasing volume. Now, when you raise the cost of everything, generally the overhead costs rise faster, and that's because there's more of them, so the price of the commodity you're selling, and thus the margin of profitability gets compressed. I'm hearing a lot from farmers that farm credit is getting harder to come by, and so increasing volume is increasingly harder to obtain. The bottom line, Avery, is that margin compression is squeezing out a lot of our producers, especially when it looks like this new farm bill is going to cut out their safety nets.
Yeah, I'm going to be really interested in what Dr. Mike Selassie has to say next week about the farm bill. Thanks a lot, Neil Melancon. And remember, you can listen to Neil's reports on the Louisiana Farm Bureau radio network for a list of stations where you can tune in, or you can listen online. Just click over to our website at twilatv.org and look for the LFB radio link on the left side of the homepage. Well, that does it for this edition of This Week in Louisiana Agriculture. Next week, we'll take a look at Election 2011, the races for governor, lieutenant governor, and of course, commissioner of agriculture. Nothing is certain until you go to the polls. Until then, you can watch all of our stories online on our website, twilatv.org. For all of us here at This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, I'm Avery Davidson. I hope to see you again right here next week.